Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Gentrio podcast. As always, I am your host, Jacob Murphy. Joined with me today is Brickson Diamond, who is a leadership advisor, currently serves on the boards of Tides, Cooper Union, the Blackhouse Foundation, and Rideback Rise. Brickson spent 9 years on the board of the National Hospice Foundation with a 2-year term as board chair and as a member of the board of the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization. Brickson Diamond holds a BA in Organizational Behavior and Management from Brown University and an MBA from Harvard Business School. Brickson, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jacob. Good to be with you.
So obviously you have quite a bit of experience in your career, been through a lot of different places. If you could, for our guests, take us through a brief timeline just explaining how you started out and how you got to where you are today.
Certainly. So out of Brown, I started out in the investment management business. I went to a training program with a big global asset management firm where my job for 2 years was just to roam around and figure out, where I could add value and how to learn how to make the business run. And so I did 2 years of training and then wound up in the firm's New York office after having been in Los Angeles, Orange County, Indianapolis, and DC. Spent 2 years in New York working with large pension plans, endowment foundations as a client relations and marketing professional. It's interesting because that's sort of the bedrock of helping people in a career that's focused on service, both in pursuit of just general support of people doing well, but also in terms of this sort of inkling of thinking about equity and opportunity for a variety of people. And so in that job, I was working with lots of pension plans, endowments, and foundations. Quit that good job, went back to Harvard Business School, and spent 2 years there before returning to the same firm in the business, but now focused on wealthy individuals, high net worth families.
Is that where you met Renee Fry?
That's where I met Renee Fry, she's a classmate from HBS.
Mm-hmm.
And so sowing some early seeds there. And so back in the wealth management business and spent 11 years there, really working with ultra high net worth families, mostly through consultants and built a consultant relations practice. But in the meantime, also got very involved in philanthropic activities, as you saw in my bio already, and helped to co-found an organization called the Blackhouse Foundation, which really was born out of going to Sundance with a bunch of HBS classmates. This theme will keep coming. And seeing magic there in terms of the opportunity for filmmakers, but also a dearth of diversity. And so over the course of the next 17 years, I built Blackhouse up to really impact diversity, access, and engagement across film festival platforms like Sundance, Tribeca, LA Film Festival, AFI Fest, Toronto, and Cannes. That's sort of the side thing, but my day job, I ended up leaving the asset management business to expand Blackhouse over a course of a year beyond Sundance, and then to go into the nonprofit space as a P&L leader, which is what I really had a hunger to do at a member association of Black executives. And I've been a member for a while, but now I was able to sit inside and really impact its programs, expand its membership. And work on really improving both its P&L and its balance sheet. That took me to DC from LA. Did that for 5 years before branching out with the help of another HBS classmate. Here they are again. Who was a coach who helped me think through my next career steps, which turned out to be a pursuit of an entrepreneurial venture where I grew and developed a consulting practice focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. In entertainment, technology, asset management, and philanthropy. In the meantime, I joined the boards of Brown University, the Middlesex School out in Concord, Massachusetts, stayed on the board of Blackhouse, and pursued other sort of nonprofit board opportunities like the flashback to the National Hospice Foundation, where I spent 9 years. And then finally, in the last sort of almost 3 years, I was recruited to Spencer Stewart, a big global leadership advisory firm, where I work on search, leadership development, but also thinking about this notion of how do you create a commercially viable and engaged diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy for the firm. So that's what I do. And you talked about the boards I'm on. That's been my path. But there's been a mix of figuring out how to help people in the for-profit and nonprofit sector, thinking about sort of this planning piece.
Hmm.
If you think about it, whether it be wealth management or hospice or Gentrio with estate planning, or even the university and sort of high school setting, it's education in action, but it's planning for a future with skills and tools that people can gather and harness for a lifetime.
Okay. What stands out to me is, you mentioned, the word support. Would it be fair to say that, would you say you're passionate about supporting people?
Absolutely.
It
It's
seems
about
like a lot
supporting
of your
people,
career is kind of geared towards that support ideology.
support, but also expansion of their sort of access to the levers of power and opportunity that allow them to really drive forward for themselves,
Hmm.
right?
I
I
wanted to ask about that with the Blackhouse Foundation, because, like you said, that's a foundation based on opening opportunities in the film industry, correct?
Mhm.
So I've always been kind of like, not in any major way, but interested in film like that. So that's what piqued my interest. But tell me a little bit
Mm.
about how, just for my own curiosity, how does that work in terms of opening those opportunities? I feel like the film industry is a place that can be very hard to get into.
It can be, and it's expanded as we started in '06, and so the notion of content as opposed to just film, and Sundance has done a great job of expanding their programming to include that through various different twists and turns. And I think that twist and turn sort of space is important to think about, particularly for the film and sort of content business as extended.
Hmm.
So we chose as an organization to go to places where there were, a combination of an incredible and powerful aesthetic, and sort of sense of how the art ties together, and a market where people were buying content. So Blackhouse is specifically focused on international and domestic market focused film festivals. And so we said it was, if we can go to this space where people are already buying, we can bring in folks who hadn't had access to that, educate them on what the aesthetic is, how their vision, their voice translates to what's commercially viable. We can create opportunity sets. And so, you go where the buyers are, you figure out, the link between your art and their appetite, and that comes together. And it's worked. So at Sundance alone in 2007, there were 120 films in the festival.
Hmm.
Um, and we were just having people come in an environment where there are only 7 Black films in the festival that year. And so over the course of the next, sort of decade and a half, we just put people in rooms with agents and managers and studio executives. And so they'd be in these rooms and they'd be learning on panels, but also socializing and making connections. And so if you fast forward to 2020, which was kind of our peak in terms of penetration of films, that 120 base now had 55 Black films, as opposed to the 7 when we started. So it worked.
Yeah.
Go where the buyers are, understand the aesthetic, combine it with your art, build relationships, and then that gives you the entree in. And it's just 10 days a year, and really just 4 or 5, where you have unfettered access in a community. And so we were excited to bring people into that community and give them roots.
No, I love that. As like a film buff, I love the idea of being able to expand that industry and give as many people as possible the opportunity to make their way into it. Because, I think that making a really good film is something really hard, and it really does help to have ideas coming from as many places as possible. And I think there's nothing but benefits that you can get by opening and expanding that industry to everyone. So you've been there for 17 years now, right?
Yep, absolutely.
So obviously you were talking about how it's expanded beyond just the film industry. Now you're into all different sorts of content creation there. Um, in your experience, how have you seen kind of the foundation grow as spaces like content creation that's not necessarily film has blown up recently?
Oh, it's been exciting to think about the notion of television,
Hmm.
which back in '06 and '07 was not something that people really, thought about. And the advent of streaming really created this sort of peak TV, which we pass through now. And so thinking about some of my favorite stories go from people like Anissa Rae,
Hmm.
who we were able to feature on a panel at Tribeca well before her HBO series Insecure premiered, to talk about her process from going to this web series she created with her Stanford classmates, literally in their living rooms, to being someone who is a multi-hyphenate, who has television and streaming and Prosecco, as well as a supporting role in the Barbie movie. And so watching that has been really powerful in terms of folks like that, but even others who have had different paths, but straight, really true to their voice in ways that may have not produced the same kind of success that Issa has, but they've, sort of staked out their claims. And so it's been, film to television to, traditional television, streaming. You go back to traditional television, we think about people like Quinta Brunson and her sort of Vine start, right? So how do you get these platforms like Instagram, rest in peace Vine,
I miss Vine.
Threads, let's go there, to be, the biggest hit in network television.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been our sort of path and journey, with some stops along the way in VR and AR, and a little dabbling in gaming, but also educational content. We work with folks who create online education and want to enliven the quality and depth of that, either through just straight education or even through education around the technical skills of content creation.
And I imagine, having been there for 17 years, you've probably put together a book of, I almost want to call it a book of support, with the contacts you've made that I'm sure lend a hand to these creators who want to get into these various industries but just don't know who to talk to. And I imagine that's a big part of what the foundation does, correct?
It is, and so we deploy them through fellowship programs, our contacts and our relationships. And so we've had 150 fellows pass through our programs over the last 17 years, and those have ranged from things that we do right in our backyard here in Hollywood to programs in Kenya with an African Screenwriters Lab. And so we have worked with not just Black creators, but across the spectrum. And so we partner with folks like Latinx House, Latino Real before them, Gold House, Muslim House, Illuminative, which is for indigenous communities, Muslim public affairs sort of association here in LA. And so just a lot of different partners to say, how do we create this coalition of folks who are telling great stories to get them on the screen and seen?
Yeah, I wish there was a greater appreciation for the foreign film industry in this country. I feel like not a lot of people realize that Hollywood's not the only place producing movies, and there's some really good movies coming out of a lot of different parts of the world. Hopefully we can get there at some point where people can appreciate
I think the Academy does a good job at that. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. This year is a banner year for foreign film, as it's titled. But I also love, and I have to throw a shout out to Netflix. So in just the way that it has promoted international content on its domestic platforms, they're Korean, Swedish, right? All these shows that people love and are addicted to, that expand their aperture and make room for additional stories that may be longer form content.
Mm-hmm. So you also spent, 2 years at the Hospice Foundation, correct?
So 2 years in National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization, but 9 at the Hospice Foundation.
That's right, nine. And
yeah.
So what was that experience like?
It was exciting and hilarious. So I was much younger then, and probably in my early 30s.
Mm-hmm.
And when I walked into the boardroom, the joke was that I brought the average age down to 70. So it was a mature group of folks.
Yeah.
But it was a passion area for me that I discovered after college graduation, because the founder of the National Hospice Foundation is a Brown graduate like me.
Mm-hmm.
And I unfortunately lost my mother to cancer when I was 12. And she was diagnosed when I was 10, and I was her primary caregiver. And so I didn't know we had hospice, but when I heard Zach Morfogen describe what hospice was, I really resonated with the clarity with which we were supported at my mother's end of life.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly me as a pre-adolescent and pre-adolescent or preteen, right? And so I got super passionate about the notion of how do you improve the experience of grieving for children and adolescents in America. And the National Hospice Foundation was an incredible vehicle for that. but also around equity. Again, here comes that word, in access to care, right? So most people at that time only had access to hospice for the last sort of 5 to 2 days of life, right? And so it was very late in the process when it was something that if afforded to a family could ease a very difficult experience and create a dignified and reduce pain filled death for everyone involved. So for me, it was about that experience and about that network. And it was fascinating because it was a period in which hospice was transitioning from mostly nonprofit to a lot of for-profit players. So there was a seismic, industry shift, and as we know, there are no end of seismic industry shifts. Mm-hmm. So that was a space for me to watch that and also have some sway over how that progressed.
Okay. So what I feel like a lot of listeners, and including myself, we know what hospice is, but we don't really know how it works. And I'm not 100% sure of, what your day-to-day looked like being there, but could mm-hmm. you give us some insight as to maybe more of the nitty-gritty of what it really means to be involved in hospice, both from, a caregiver's point of view or someone who is maybe a little higher up in the organization?
Yeah, so from the board perspective, from the National Hospice Foundation board, we were really worried about raising money to increase awareness and to really support the movement of hospice, which means creating more access, creating more opportunities for facilities, particularly in rural areas where you don't have clear and defined centers of medical excellence. And so that was our job, was to raise money and awareness from the foundation side. And the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization, it was a member association essentially. It was a sort of trade organization of hospices. So thinking about how do you ensure quality, how do you ensure funding from the government, how do you make sure that the regulation all works well to ensure that quality remains high. But then at the bedside, and so hospice takes any number of forms, which can range from a hospice provider, a nurse, or a practitioner or a physician who comes to your bedside in the hospital, to which is the latter is the more preferred form of dying, is care at your bedside at home. Mm-hmm. And so the hospice nurse and doctor make it possible for you to be cared for at end of life. Typically, palliative care is about pain abatement. The hospice it's about that end of life care. And not always, but in some cases, you will then forego traditional treatment for this notion of how do you create comfort. And so it's ironic because I was in the hospice movement. My father went to grad school with a guy in the 60s whose son is also in hospice as a hospice physician. So two kids, fathers from the 60s, grew up next door to each other, both in hospice. And so what he does is he helps with the pain management as a doctor at the bedside and saying, how do I make sure that you are in as little pain as possible, but then explaining to you and the family as the patient what's happening. Mm-hmm. What's the process, how this will go. And so taking a little bit of the shroud of mystery off of the dying process and increasing the awareness and comfort of everyone involved. And so it's a gentler process. It's a quieter process. It often extends life because you're not pursuing sort of invasive and challenging medical procedures, but really just taking the time for your body to ease mm-hmm. to its next stage.
I can't imagine that being anywhere near an easy industry to be in, especially in the decision-making side of it. Would I be correct in assuming that a big struggle that people in that decision-making area have to face is that battle between we want to give the best possible care and obviously keep people as comfortable as possible and have that quality of care, but also sometimes it comes down to tough decisions to make, whether it's a lack of funding or something like that?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, they work in concert with other physicians and medical providers. So by the time you get to the hospice decision, the choices are pretty limited.
Okay.
Right. And so that makes it a little easier. It's still very difficult, but it's the challenge is, I think, and I've been out of the movement for a while, so I tread with caution here. The challenge is resisting the temptation to see it as giving up. Mm-hmm. right? And so somebody said, well, you gave up. You could have just kept fighting. And so usually the diagnosis is such that this is, the sort of end of life is inevitable for us all. But in these cases, it's pretty clear that the treatment options are limited. And so this is a bit of a claim for dignity, right? A bit of a claim for peace, a little bit of a claim for ease in the context of something that's very, very difficult. And so it takes a lot of fortitude for practitioners to be able to support families, but their ability to know and share what the path will be is super helpful, right? And so that's my own mother, just the clarity of, how what will be the signs that we're nearing the end. What will be those signs was critically important to have, and somehow gave you some resolve and comfort to know this is where we are, this is how much broadly how much time we have, and this is how we want to use it. And so that for caregivers and for hospice practitioners, it's super emotional and tough, and even more so for the patient. But we hope it gives more clarity, more peace, more comfort.
So in not just this part of your career, but your entire career, while we're kind of on this note, what are some of the kind of the challenges that you've faced that you've taken as lessons and carried throughout the rest of your life? Because I can imagine there's no shortage of those in the hospice industry, but throughout the rest of your industry as well. What are some of the big takeaways that you've carried?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway I've carried, in that I've tried to be a person who helped to solve for, is this notion of the power of the individual,
Mm-hmm.
and the temptation and influence of groups to really tamp down our individuality, right? In order to be a part of the in group, you have to sacrifice some part of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've been able to explore that through my own personal experience and career, but also through the work I've done to be able to lift that barrier for others, to really sort of let people learn how to fly their flag in all its uniqueness to success, whether that be where I was working with the Black executives, whether that be where I was working with wealthy families, where one of my favorite responses to the question of what's this all for? Why am I working so hard? Why am I planning so hard? Why am I doing this? It's for you and your children to begin each day with a beginner's mind,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which again talks about individuality. And even in my work in executive search and leadership advisory, it's about harnessing the best that each individual has. And so, maybe it's going back to my days at Brown, where, they accuse us sort of being a snowflake university, where every snowflake is different and unique. But I actually believe that, right? And I think that the world is made better by cultivating and drawing out the best of individuals and creating systems and structures that encourage that. And so my career has been about doing that, and I've learned the lesson of how to be more myself,
Mm-hmm.
and how to, in that regard, achieve success, but also spread that by allowing and building structures that provide space for others to be their full and unique selves.
And I respect that completely, and I think that's even outside of a professional career area. I think that's something that people struggle with all the time, just finding out who they are and the balance between the groups you're a part of influencing, be it your personality or your character, versus maintaining that individuality and just who you are, regardless of where you are. Do you think, and this is more just purely philosophical because you brought up that kind of topic, do you think it has to be a give and take between the individual and the group? Does it have to be transactional when you are a part of a group? Does that have to take away from the individual? Because there are benefits to being part of groups, obviously.
Yeah.
But like you were saying, sometimes it can feel like it takes away from the individual. Does it have to be transactional, or have you found it can be balanced?
It can be balanced. I mean, that's been sort of my life's work, is creating the balance,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think it is a matter of, I did a TED Unplugged talk in 2019 at the TED conference. And what we did there is we talked about a little bit of, right.
Mm-hmm.
So I did, I think about this in my life and my work. I did a TED Unplugged talk in 2019, sort of in the basement of TED conference, talking about how tapping into your own vulnerability allows you to create space for others. And so I think that is the space in which we create that opportunity, right? For each of us to tap into who we are, to actually resist that sort of transactional pull.
Mm-hmm.
Say, all right, I'll trade this part of me for this reward. To say, no, I'm going to stand in who I am and succeed, and let you know who I am, create space for others to do the same. And in fact, it isn't just sort of a trade, it is additive. The group is stronger because we're each bringing our uniqueness to it, right? And so I think that is the sort of counterintuitive piece we think we got to all assimilate in order for this thing to work, when in fact we have to all sort of bring our best and purest selves and flex and exercise inclusive leadership to make sure there is space and room for each perspective and dimension. And so that actually creates a better whole, where in fact the temptation and the tradition says to us, no, just pour into this thing just what they want or think they want to get ahead.
So with all of this in mind, what led you to Gentrio? For our listeners who may not know, Brickson is on our board as an advisor, correct?
That's correct.
So what led you to Gentrio after all of this experience? What was the attraction to become a part of this company?
So we talked about Renee being a classmate from business school, so super excited to invest in my classmates. But also just, it was such a great extension of the work that I'd done in hospice so many years ago in terms of that end of life planning and care. And so democratizing that and making this important set of determinations and decisions and the tools to enact those available to a wider range of people was super exciting.
Yeah, right? I like to think that while the tools that Gentrio offers aren't the same as what hospice offers in terms of, making sure people are comfortable, I think it is an important aspect of that end-of-life care to, our motto is always leave a legacy, not a mess, especially in such a difficult time. I really think the education so that people know how to be prepared so that when the time comes for the passing of a loved one or any sort of big moment in life, you don't have to worry about this kind of nitty-gritty paperwork, court dates, financial fees. You can just focus on that emotional side of things, and I think that really does add to that comfort. Would you agree?
It really does. I think back to my time in the wealth management world, and we always said that we wanted folks to set the parameters of their lives in place in the fullest moments of love, right? And so that means a prenup before you get married, because you want to, the marriage is going to end. Someone's going to leave, someone's going to die. There's just, from just social structures and biology, this marriage can't go on forever. And so that it's a prenup on the front end, but also a will and an estate plan. And so, it is about alleviating those barriers for your family and your loved ones, but it's also about expressing your love in the form of your planning, right? And setting in place the structures and the steps and the resources that your fullest point of love can provide. And so, it seems mechanical what we do, but in fact, it is really about that expression and giving that best to your family and to yourself.
And I think a lot of us find that's kind of where our passion comes from. Is you may not see it doing the work like what I do, producing, helping in different areas of the company and having our product be the best it can be. You may not see that result right away, but when you hear those stories down the line of heartache that you've saved because your product has been out there, that's definitely what keeps me into this.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. And there, the technology can be used for humanity's expansion. And so I think that's really what we're working towards here, and what drew me to the enterprise was how to spread love through technology, and how to help people face hard sort of life circumstances And that goes to my time in hospice. But also thinking about ways that you can really be impactful in the world to a wide range of people, and this is one for me for certain.
Yeah, I definitely think that technology getting involved in industries where you may not think it would be involved initially, like estate planning, um, I think it's definitely going to be beneficial. It's beneficial now, but down the line, incredibly beneficial. It's tough in these industries that have super traditional ways of doing things like estate planning, because I find that occasionally you get people who are a little hesitant um, to change their ways. You know, so many people, they need a physical copy of something, which is fine, and I completely understand that. I still take notes during meetings on paper, and even though I have 6 monitors in front of me,
Mm.
um, but I think it will be incredibly beneficial as people start to realize that technology is it is a friend of ours, especially when it comes to things like this and keeping yourself safe and protected and ready for the future. Would you agree with that? And do you think there is some hesitation sometimes to navigate away from the traditional?
Yeah, I think so. I guess my greater fear is that people aren't doing anything at all,
Well, yeah.
right? And so I think this is a way to democratize that service where you don't have to go to the office and spend a lot of money on a lawyer. You actually have a solution that you can, uh, most of us, even if we have a little fear of technology, are pretty comfortable with our laptop, right? Pretty comfortable with our iPad,
Hmm.
and it's a space where you can have that comfort to deliver those services that you would otherwise need to go out of your house into a space to find somebody to do. So I hope it's an easy access point, that we've made it pretty seamless and pretty comfortable to think about, how do you get away from your file cabinet to your digital file cabinet,
Hmm.
but also how do you create a more personal experience, ironically, through technology, right? And so it's hard to find somebody who's a great estate planner,
Hmm.
right? The great estate attorney, and it's pretty arduous. And you got to, go to their office and do it. Whereas in this case, you can use technology to really do it whenever if you're an early bird, wake up early in the morning, work on it in the morning, or if you stay up late at night, you can do it whenever it is most comfortable and convenient for you. And so I hope that people see that technology as an enabler and a way to create more intimacy around this process rather than less.
Hmm. And of course, just to reiterate what you said, it is important to make sure you do it. Speaking directly to our listeners right now, we always talk about how estate planning is for everyone. Doesn't matter how much or how little you have. That's always the concern that we have, is people just don't get around to it.
Yeah,
Don't think that they need to do it. And again, speaking to the listener, you do need to do it.
it goes back to biology. It's
Hmm.
gonna, this life is gonna end, and we want you to set your loved ones up with your full love and your full presence, and that's what you can do right now.
And I think another big part of it that people don't think about is it's not just about you. This is your kids, your grandkids, all the way down the line. You have the opportunity to start something and help it grow for generations.
Absolutely.
One last thing, and I always like to get a little more philosophical, not that we haven't already, but before we end, since you're entrepreneur, philanthropist on more boards than I'm sure I even read out at the beginning here, what advice for someone maybe in a similar situation to me, who's early in their career, maybe just starting out, maybe someone who's still, figuring their way at the beginning of their time at Brown University? Um, what advice would you give to someone who's trying to get going, get started, who wants to have a career similar to yours in terms of being successful?
Mm. I think my biggest advice is it's about your boss, right? It's not about necessarily the organization or the industry or even the role. It's get your way in the boss and get yourself in the way of a boss who is dynamic, talented, and successful,
Hmm.
who also cares about your development. And so I think that's been the secret to my success. It's having bosses or board leaders or folks who could make a way for me, who were really invested in me, who challenged and developed me. but who also then advocated for me. So talk about this mentor versus sponsor, and so I've had mentors and sponsors. But I think underneath that, the difference is a mentor is someone who gives you advice and tells you what to do. A sponsor is someone who speaks on your behalf and makes doors open for you. But somewhere in between that is somebody who day to day is really cultivating you and making sure that you're getting the experiences that you need to be a well-rounded leader and successful in your space. And so having that boss, somebody who really can set the pace, but also cultivate and help you is a critically important career sort of accelerator. And it's not easy to do. I say that with the full acknowledgement that, most job interviews are about the organization and about I'm going to go in early career. I'm going to find a job in this big behemoth company, and I don't know who my boss is going to be. Right. And I think even in that, once you get inside, you can start to sort of not maneuver to see who is somebody you admire, who's working on projects that you are excited about, that you can align yourself with. And at every stage, finding that great boss, that great person who just pushes you, but also champions you is a critical factor for your success. And I would say, a big reason why I've done boards as well as my day job is to get access to that. Right. So it may not be my direct day-to-day boss, but it's somebody who's my board chair or my committee chair that I can work with and learn from, but who also pushes and advocates for me.
I definitely think it would be a good life goal to aim to be one of those people as well someday.
Absolutely. And I think we can all be that today, right? There's some intern, there's some more junior person. I remember when I worked in the asset management business, the IT guy who sat outside my office, I worked with him, and I was not his direct boss, but I certainly was an influence on his success. And he ended up going to the training program that I was in. And now he's built a thriving career at a level that was very different from where he started, by leaning into relationships and letting people lead him. And to let people know when he wanted to do something and set him up for success in those pursuits.
And I think just to add on even additionally too, I think outside of a career, it's still important to have this mindset, being a supporter, being a mentor outside of, the office space too, just in your day-to-day life is also something that should not be shied away from or ignored.
Oh yeah. I mean, quick story. I grew up in sort of public schools in Atlanta, Georgia, and a neighbor who encouraged me to pursue the magnet school for international studies in our city, and that led me into the National Baccalaureate program, which I never would have gotten to on my own. And this woman was just a neighbor. She's a neighbor who saw a kid next door who she liked and thought I had potential, and she worked hard to make sure I was fulfilling that. And so I think that goes to your other question of you don't have to be the big boss to do that. You can just help the neighbor kid. Or the new person on your team. We can all do it. We can all have impact.
Yeah. So I would say don't shy away from relationships. You never know where they might take you. You never know who your neighbor might be. So,
and what their great advice might provide. So shout out to Amalia Stevens, to whom I owe a lot of gratitude for getting me on this track.
Well, thank you, Brickson, so much for being here. I really enjoyed our conversation. Any last words? Any shout out that you'd like to put out to our listeners before we go?
I'm going to put a plug in for our service, right? I think it's an important, sometimes hard, but important way to think about your legacy. And so I'm excited that more and more folks get to take that opportunity and to create a path for their loved ones.
And I said this on the last episode, but your legacy is not built in one day. Your estate plan most likely won't be built in one day. So get started, and you never know where you'll take it from there.
I'll date myself now and quote a movie. What about Bob? Baby steps.
All right, Brickson. Well, I appreciate you being on here.
My pleasure.
All right.
Good to meet you.
Take care.